Good morning. At the beginning of his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about what kind of people would be blessed. And today we're looking at the fourth blessed statement in Matthew 5, which says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they will be filled." I would like to start with a confession. During the past few months of lockdown, I've put on a few pounds. Seems like you really are what you eat and how much you eat. And that applies in the spiritual realm as well. I love cooking and enjoy trying new dishes, and it usually starts with me going through cookery books or online recipes to find my next creation. But in order to understand what the recipe is about, I really want to know a few things, such as what ingredients are in it, how difficult or complex will it be to make, and will I enjoy it? In the same way, reading Jesus' statement, I think it is worthwhile to find out, what does Jesus mean by righteousness? What does he mean by hunger and thirst? And will I really be filled? So let's start at the first one. What does Jesus mean by righteousness? Well, as far as I could find in the Bible, the word righteousness has three meanings. Firstly, it means the right standing with God. That is what we call justification, where God declares us not guilty. Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So it's not enough to follow some religious system and to be seen to tick the right boxes. True righteousness starts in the heart and changes a person from the inside out. Secondly, righteousness of character and conduct. Are we doing our best to live and behave in a way that is pleasing to God? Jesus says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of people, to be seen by them. Otherwise, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." You see, the Pharisees would sacrifice almost anything to win the praise of others. Their religion was built on the praise of man, and by contrast, true discipleship surely is a righteousness that doesn't need to be seen by others, but only by God. And thirdly, a social righteousness of how the poor, the lonely, the foreigners, like me, and the widows are treated. A righteousness of justice, of integrity in your business and your work, and of deliverance from oppression. Putting these points together, what do we have? We are to hunger and thirst after a true Christian lifestyle that changes us from the inside out, so that we no longer seek the praise of man, but seek God's approval above everything else. A lifestyle that defends the weak and is above reproach. Sounds good, doesn't it? So why don't we all live this way? Well, that leads me to my next point. So what does Jesus mean by hunger and thirst? I guess the people Jesus addressed at the time understood what it meant to be hungry and thirsty. In that region, few were prosperous, and more likely than not, at one time or another, those listening to the Sermon on the Mount that day had experienced the kind of hunger and thirst that he's talking about here. Most of us have never known true hunger or thirst like these people. To us, hunger means waiting 10 minutes for the next takeaway to arrive. You see, Eric's problem is not finding something to eat, it's losing the flav that comes from eating too much. Jesus uses the example of eating and drinking as the motivational power to live a righteous life. Here are some observations that might help us with that. First of all, you have to want it, don't you? No one can force you to eat and drink. The old adage is true. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Now granted, most of us, including me, doesn't need much forcing to make us eat. But like food, you have to want to live a righteous life. The verbs for hunger and thirst means an intense desire or craving. It is as though you are parched and nothing will stop you from getting to the water fountain to drink. Or you are so hungry that you will pursue it at all cost. It's a desperate kind of hunger. In a different context, if you describe a person who is ambitious, passionate, and desperate to achieve or to succeed, we say he or she is hungry for success. It's the same kind of passion and drive that should motivate us to pursue righteousness. Secondly, you have to take action. Appetites don't get filled by just wanting it. It's one thing to say I'm hungry and I desire food. It's quite another to actually take steps to satisfy the hunger and quench the thirst. At some point you have to get up and find food and water in order to eat and drink. By the way, have you ever noticed that a loss of appetite is a sign of illness? Physically speaking, we know something is wrong when we have no desire to eat. The same is true spiritually. When we don't anymore hunger and thirst for time alone with God, and we aren't committed to worship, and we fail to get alarmed about our sinful condition and the sin in the world, we display clear signs of spiritual sickness, and we need help. Often we try to overcome spiritual loss of appetite by going to the wrong places: pleasure, performance, or possessions. God says, "Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare." You need to keep coming back for more. That's point 3. Grammatically speaking, Jesus expressed the two Greek verbs hunger and thirst as implying continuous action. A person doesn't stop hungering and thirsting for righteousness just because he or she has crossed the line of faith. It is a constant pursuit to live a life of righteousness, to yearn to be more and more like Christ. Now, the last point, will I really be filled? The final part of the verse is a promise from God. They will be filled. With what? Food? Money? Long life? Promotion maybe? Or happiness? A perfect family? A trouble-free life? No, none of that. What then? Well, obviously, you will be filled with righteousness. Stands to reason, doesn't it? If you eat chicken curry, you'll be full of chicken curry, right? If you're hungry and thirsty for righteousness and fill yourself with it, you will be filled with righteousness. The righteousness I mentioned earlier. You'll be justified by God. You will be of good character and conduct. You'll have a heart for the poor, the lonely, the foreigners, and the widows. But you will also be filled with Jesus himself. Jesus never said, "Come and join the church," or "Come and do an alpha course," or "Come and give us some money." He simply said, "Come to me." If you're hungry, come and eat of the bread of life, Jesus. If you're thirsty, come and drink from the fountain of life, Jesus. If you are weary and heavy laden, Jesus says, "Come to me and find rest." If you are guilty, come and be forgiven. And if you're far from God, come back home again. You see, through Jesus' death and resurrection, God has punched a hole into history, and the age of heaven has spilled into this present age, and an entire smorgasbord of blessings is available to you and me right now. The blessings connected with hungering and thirsting for righteousness is just one of the many dishes on offer, which will ensure that one day we will be perfectly conformed to the image of Jesus. In 2 Peter 3, after painting a graphical picture of the destruction of the earth, it says this: "But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells." See, wrapped in the arms of Jesus Christ, when we get to heaven, we are the righteousness of God. This is where we will dwell. How amazing is that? Will you be there? Let's be honest. We all need to say, "I'm sorry," to God. We all need a Savior, and Jesus Christ is the only one to trust. He's the only one who has already paid the price for us on the cross, and is the only way to heaven. Now, if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, his invitation to you and the direction of how to get there are all in this amazing book, the Bible. The question is, are you hungry? Do you want to come to the feast that Jesus has prepared for you? I hope so.